Hi. Um, for the next couple of weeks, we're going to be tackling the book of Leviticus. No, don't switch off because I know this has got the reputation of being a really boring book, and it's it's one of the most difficult books in the Bible to read, and there's a lot of people that don't actually see the reason for the book of Leviticus being in the Bible. But I'm hopefully going to shed some light on why it's there and the things that it can bring to the table. So God didn't give us a book. I know we refer to the Bible as a book, but it's not as such a book. It's a compendium of books. There are actually 66 individual books, and that's why I 100% encourage you to read the Bible book by book, and not take just quotes out of context from here, there, and everywhere, because quotes out of context give you a disproportionate view of the Bible, and basically you can make a quote out of the Bible to say anything, but it's when you get into the books and read the book, read the quotes in context. That's why I always encourage my people to, when they've heard a quote, to read what comes before the quote and what comes after. So a chapter before and a chapter after, to get the context in which this quote comes from. And quite often it puts it into a completely different perspective to what the preacher is talking about. We don't do this with any other book. You don't just see people taking a quote out of Shakespeare, or a quote out of Darwin, or a quote out of Brian Cox novel, or a quote out of Terry Pratchett novel. You just don't see that, and yet it's become okay to do it with the Bible. And personally, I don't think it's okay, because there are lots and lots of quotes that taken completely out of context and are just lose all their meaning and all their bearing on the situation. And to read the books of the Bible book by book, I can quite imagine you read Genesis and then Exodus, and you're getting into it, and then you come to Leviticus and you get stuck and you just drop it all. But I'm going to try and to some extent demystify Leviticus. There are 3 reasons why Leviticus is a very difficult book to read. The first is it's a boring book, plain and simple. It's like trying to read the phone directory. It's boring because it is so difficult in content, and it's different in its content to the other books of the Bible. The first 2 books of the Bible are full of stories. They're full of narrative. There's a plot and there's characters and there's this and that going on. And then suddenly you get into Leviticus and there's hardly any narrative at all. And we regard the Bible as a book of stories. And there's this book, which has no stories in it. The second reason is it's unfamiliar. It's a different culture, as well as a different continent. We are living 2,000 years away from when this happened, and we're about 2,000 miles away from where it happened. We are so far away physically and time-wise, and we are reading things that are frankly quite strange to us. It's a little bit more understandable for a Jewish culture to read, but the Jewish culture has still got that separation of time. And thirdly, it seems to be irrelevant, not just boring and unfamiliar, but irrelevant. What has this got to do with me living now? We know that we are not living under the law of Moses, and this is part of his law. So what's it got to do with us? Well, we will have a look. It's one of 5 books which are known as the Pentateuch. Penta meaning 5. And the first 5 books in the Bible, the Jews call the Torah. And basically this means the books of instruction. And they read it once a year. They start on the 8th day of the Feast of Tabernacles, and they read it through the year until the first day, and then they basically have 7 days off, and then they start reading it again. But they read it bit by bit. Now let's look at the first 5 books of the Bible, and let's look at the shape of them. And that sounds like a really weird thing to say, to look at the shape of them, but you may understand once we've got through it. Let's look at the books. We've got Genesis, which is the beginnings of the world and all that means. We've got Exodus, which means a going out and escaping, and Leviticus, which is about the Levites. Numbers, which is essentially what it's about. It's about statistics. And Deuteronomy, which is the second law. Genesis is a universal book. It's a universal book about everybody. Exodus is about we zoom in to concentrate on a nation, and Leviticus we zoom in again to concentrate on one tribe. Numbers is about the national numbers, and Deuteronomy is a universal book again. It puts Israel against a backcloth of the nations of the world. Where do these all happen? Genesis happens essentially in Chaldea, and Canaan. Exodus happens in Egypt, and Leviticus happens on Mount Sinai. Deuteronomy happens in the Negev and Edom and Moab. We're focusing in on a mountain essentially for Leviticus, and you start seeing a sort of shape like this, it's the universe, and um, a nation and one tribe, and then nation and the universe again, and we sort of see this happening in terms of the places where this is happening, in terms of that as well. And Genesis takes centuries. Exodus takes around about 300 to 400 years. Leviticus is focused in on 1 month. Numbers is about 40 years, and Deuteronomy takes centuries. It's looking at the future. It looks forward in the future of Israel's history, and we can see that quite clearly. It's sort of a hinge point where God's focusing down and down and down and down until he focuses on one tribe for 1 month on the Mount of Sinai, and then it all goes out again. God gave his 2 laws, or his law twice, once at Sinai and once just before the Jewish nation crossed the Jordan into the Promised Land. The 10 Commandments came twice, once in Exodus and once in Deuteronomy, which is the second time. And they had a sort of, Deuteronomy was a sort of reminder of the law just before they went into the Promised Land. So we can see that Leviticus is the hinge to this whole thing. It's the hinge that keeps the Torah together. We're focusing down to the most important month and the most important place and the most important tribe. And that's why this book is so important. I said important a lot there. It really is important. The whole of the law of Moses hangs on this book. We need to relate Leviticus back to Exodus to see how these books follow on from one another. It's really important to see how these books grow out of the previous book. So how does Leviticus build on Exodus? In the second half of Exodus, we have the tabernacle being built, God's tent in which he lies among his people. In Exodus, there's God's tent in the middle of hundreds and hundreds of other tents around it. There's a divine tent in amongst all these human tents. And the book of Leviticus is about everything that goes on in God's tent and everything that should be going on in the people's tents. It divides into 2 halves, God's tent and the people's tents. And it is the regulations, if you like, for both of them. There's more to it than that, but that's essentially what we're talking about here. The book of Exodus talks about God's approach to man, but Leviticus talks about man's approach to God. And the book of Exodus is about the deliverance that God brought to his people. But the book of Leviticus is about the dedication of God's people to God himself. So the book of Exodus is about God's grace in setting them free. And the book of Leviticus begins with their offerings. How the people can show their gratitude for being set free. And therefore, we need to see both halves. It may not be as exciting a book as Exodus, but God expects something from us for what he has done for us. And that's all wrapped up in the book of Leviticus. We are saved in order to serve. Exodus talks about how God's people are saved by God, and Leviticus talks about how they should be serving God. We are not just saved from something, we are saved for something. We will see how to read Leviticus in we will see how to read Leviticus is a matter of life and death to the Jew. To read this book and to know it, and even more to live it. There's only one God, and that's the God of Israel. There is only one God, and they were his people on earth. It's a very special relationship. On God's side, he promised to do so many things for them. He promised to be their government. He promised to be their minister of defense and to protect them. He promised to be their minister of finance and their minister of health, to see that no diseases of Egypt would touch them. In short, to be everything that they needed. He was going to be their king, and in return he expected them to live right lives and to do right or be righteous. And the key text in Leviticus keeps popping up in the New Testament. Be holy, for I am holy. In other words, God expects the people he liberates to be like him and not to be like everyone else in the world. Being in the world, not of the world. Ring a bell somewhere? God's saying in Leviticus, you mustn't do that because the people around you are doing that. You must keep yourself separated. You must keep yourself separate from them. You are to be different. You are to be holy because I am holy. You are to reflect my holiness. You are to reflect my character and let people see what I am like by what you are like. Now that text is key. Be holy because I am holy. And you'll find it all over the New Testament because it still applies, and it applied to the New Testament and it applies today. If God saves you and he expects you to be like him, he expects you to live his way, the holy way, and he expects us to be holy as he is holy. Well, that was a starting point for the book of Leviticus. I hope you'll join me over the next couple of weeks when we explore more about the book of Leviticus. And please enjoy your reading of the Bible, because the more you read it, the more it opens up to you. It's like a flower. When the flower is closed, you can't get to smell the aroma, the beautiful smell that comes out from the center of the rose. But as you read in the Bible, it opens up and produces a beautiful flower. Thanks very much. God bless.